All right. Well, most people looks like have logged in. So I would like to just start by welcoming everyone. Thank you for joining us. Thank you to those of you who attended our webinar that we had 2 weeks ago, where we addressed social media and our children and how to navigate through those waters, how to help our children to have a healthy relationship with social media. Tonight, the focus will be similar but different in that we are, as Chris said, we're going to look in the mirror tonight a little bit more and evaluate our own personal social media usage. Many of the principles that we'll learn tonight and discuss tonight will obviously be able to be applied in the parenting setting as well. But the goal for tonight is really to really zero in on some things that we need to keep in mind as we are interacting with social media ourselves. So my name is Brian Hannon. For those of you who don't know, I'm the director of GracePoint Resource Center and one of the pastors of Tri-County Bible Church in Rensselaer, Indiana. It's in northwestern Indiana. And GracePoint exists to offer people help and practical resources, biblical resources to help them with the various challenges they might be facing in their lives. We offer individual biblical counseling that if any of you would ever have a need for biblical counseling, whether that be for your marriage, for your family, for anything else you might be dealing with, we offer that virtually as well. So if any of you have interest in that or need in that in the future, don't hesitate to reach out. We obviously offer webinars. We also offer group topics, group classes on different topics at different times throughout the year. So if you want to be in the know of what we're doing, just either like our Facebook page or just keep an eye on our website. We're constantly updating those things. So before I kind of introduce Chris and allow him to share a little bit about himself, what I would like to do is just describe a little bit about how the software will work tonight, how the meeting will go. Those of you who were with us last time, obviously you already know, and it will be very similar. So you guys will be in view only mode. This is a webinar. It's not a normal Zoom meeting. But you will be able to interact with us through either the Q&A function or the chat function. So you can send questions, send comments through that at any point in time during the talk. Feel free to send those through, whether that be a question you want me to ask Chris, or whether that be, saying the sound is not working or my connection is not coming through clearly, whatever that might be. If at any point we do have problems with the technology or with the internet, even just a few minutes ago when Chris and I were meeting, we kind of froze up. So obviously there's possibility of that happening. And if it does, then just everyone log out, or if we get disconnected and you're already logged out, just log right back in just like you did, and I'll basically just restart the meeting. So I think that's enough about kind of the technology side of things. The next thing I'd like to do is just open us in a word of prayer, asking the Lord to guide us and help us to glean as much as we can from Chris's wisdom. And then I'll kind of turn it over to him. He'll spend some time talking about himself and his family, and then dive right into the material. So let me open us with a word of prayer. So Father, once again, we just thank you for allowing us to gather again after we had our meeting a couple of weeks ago as well. And thank you for how well that went. And I pray that those who attended found it helpful and encouraging and practical. I pray the same thing for tonight, that everyone would walk away from here tonight with practical understanding and knowledge from your word and biblical principles that they can apply to their own personal social media usage. This is something that affects all of us, most of us directly, if not directly, all of us indirectly. So I just pray for Chris tonight that you would speak to us through him, that you'd help him to think and speak clearly to us, and that we would listen well, and that we would learn the things that you desire us to learn, so that we can honor and glorify you in the way that we use social media in our daily lives. And we ask all of this in Christ's name. Amen. So a brief introduction about Chris. Chris lives in Nashville, Tennessee. He has a wife and 2 children. He's the director of creative and special projects at Moody Publishers. He's a social media marketing and communications consultant. He's published 2 books on social media and our relationship with it. I should have had this one closer, but I didn't. This is called The Wolf in Their Pockets And this is 13 ways the social internet threatens the people that you lead. So last webinar, we kind of covered the material in this book, or at least scratched the surface of it. This is more focused on for church leaders, parents, knowing how to help those that they're leading. Tonight, we're going to be discussing the other book that he wrote, which is called Terms of Service, the real cost of social media. I read both of these resources. I found them very helpful, practical. It really helped me to understand a lot about the dangers of social media and some of the ways that it affects us. So tonight we'll be kind of covering the material from Terms of Service. And so I would recommend both of these books to everyone if you want further study and further reading on these topics. Those would be excellent resources to pick up. So I'd like to now just kind of turn it over to Chris, given the opportunity to share a little bit more about his family, his job, maybe anything he wants to share about him personally, and then he will just dive right into the material for us. And as I said before, if you have any questions along the way, just send them through. And at the end of our time, we'll hopefully leave about 30 minutes or so for Q&A, and then I'll ask Chris those questions at that stage. So I'll turn it over to you, Chris.
Thanks. Yeah, thanks again for having me, Brian. Yeah, he mentioned the two books and how they relate to last webinar and this one. And I'm part of being an author. The biggest part of being an author is writing books, obviously. The hardest part of being an author is talking about your books, at least for me. Maybe it's easy for some people. I'm not the kind of guy who likes to talk about my books all the time or ask people to buy them. I tend to just think the right people will find them and hopefully they'll be helpful. But yeah, if you last time was was kind of scratching the surface of the wolf in their pockets, and this one is definitely more scratching the surface of Terms of Service, which is just, in fact, I think Terms of Service was the first one that I wrote about social media, and that was just kind of like, all right, I have a lot of thoughts about our relationship with social media as Christians, so let's just kind of write the foundational book on how do we relate to social media as Christians, and how should we consider relating to it. That's what Terms of Service is, and that's why it's a bit more of a mirror. It's a little bit harder, more convicting of a book to read. It was a really convicting book to write, frankly. And that's kind of the vibe of tonight. The second one was like, okay, now that we've set the stage, if you imagine them as sort of a 2-book series, but not really, they can be read in any order. The second one is like, kind of, okay, now that we've examined our relationship with social media, how can we lead other people as they're being impacted by social media? And so that's more the nature of the wolf in their pockets. So just a little bit more detail on those. But about me, I live just outside Nashville, Tennessee, in a city called Murfreesboro, Tennessee, just a little southeast of Nashville on I-24. It's kind of a college town, and it feels that way a little bit. Middle Tennessee State University is located here, and I apologize for anyone who was with us 2 weeks ago. Some of this is going to be the same, so apologize if it's not new. But for anyone who wasn't, this is just a little bit about where I'm at. In fact, I think living in Murfreesboro feels a little bit like Lafayette and West Lafayette, which I should say, if you don't remember from last time or weren't here, I'm from Fort Wayne, Indiana, and my grandmother lives in Lafayette still. She's 88 and doing well there in Lafayette. And my dad grew up, his mom is the one who lives there. My dad grew up in Lafayette, went to Purdue University. I spent so much time growing up living in Fort Wayne, going to Lafayette many, many weekends, spent weeks in the summer hanging out at my grandma's house. My grandfather was a Lafayette city police officer for a number of years. Worked at the Alcoa plant there. And so I know your general area really well. And often remember seeing street signs or signs for Rensselaer on my way to visit grandma in Lafayette. And I know that she has had friends who live there, and she's familiar with your guys' area too. So I'm not, even though I'm down here in good old Nashville, Tennessee, and now am sort of a Southerner. I have not lived half my life here, but it's getting closer and closer every year. I definitely feel at home with my Hoosier friends in the Midwest. And like I said last time, I will say again, Hoosier by living in Indiana, but boiler up all day, every day. I don't know if everyone on the phone, everyone on the webinar is on the same page on that, but boiler up. Hopefully we can get March Madness to get the tournament taken care of this year. That'd be kind of nice.
Well, you're up against the clock tonight because there's a pregame tonight. So
I mean, that's, we'll blaze then, we'll get going. and we'll so we can go catch that. But anyway, so that's just a little bit about me. Both my wife and I. My wife's name is Susie. We're both from Fort Wayne. We both went to Taylor University, which you might know of. It's just a bit east of you, over just north of Indy. We both went to Taylor University. We have 2 daughters. Magnolia is almost 4 years old, which is just so crazy to think about. And Daisy, who's just over 4 months old. And so we've got a couple girls and a dog. His name is Rizzo, named after the Cubs first baseman of old. And I work for Moody Bible Institute, which is just up the highway a bit from you guys in Chicago. Moody Bible Institute is there in downtown Chicago, and I work for Moody Publishers, which is a part of Moody Bible Institute. And we consider our friends at the Institute and Moody Radio our brothers and sisters. I mean, we all work for the same folks. And so we just work in different places and do different things. So I spend my day job most of the time helping get covers on our books. We publish about 60 books a year. And my job, I am not a graphic designer. I'm not an artist in that way, but I have the privilege of leading a team of incredibly talented artists and creative people. And we are in charge of getting beautiful covers on the really helpful and excellent books that our authors write. And so that's how I spend a lot of my time. I never imagined working in Christian publishing. Never thought of it when I got my Bible degree from Taylor and my seminary degree from Southeastern Seminary, but it's really cool. It's really cool to do ministry through books. I believe in books as much as I think, the internet is the future, as it will, just as it were, despite some of the negativity you might feel tonight. I think books are not going away. And so I really believe in books and the transformative power of them. So anyway, I'm going to share my screen so that you can see the very basic slide presentation I have for us. And then we will get going. And I'll do a little bit more talking about my background, just because it feeds into a good bit of the beginning of our chat tonight. So I lost my notes here. Okay, here we go. Let me get my Zoom screen all arranged. You can see my my PowerPoint, I believe, correct? Okay, cool, great. All right. So thanks again for having me. In my day job, like I said, I serve as creative director at Moody Publishers. I live just outside Nashville for fun. I write books, at least in part. That's what I do. I talked about my 2 books already. And I have the reason I wrote 2 books about social media is because I have a pretty rich history with social media. I think I shared a little bit about this last time, but just to explain again, I have kind of a personal and professional angle on social media. First, the personal. I was born in 1990 to a dad who worked for IBM. So my dad, he went to Purdue and got a computer science degree back when computers took up entire rooms, right? And moved to Fort Wayne and started working for IBM. And it was one of the biggest computer companies in the world at the time. In the 90s, if you don't remember, or if you weren't alive, I don't know the ages of everybody on the call, but in the 90s, IBM had the kind of cool reputation that Apple kind of enjoys today. IBM was the company that was responsible for bringing personal computers into the homes of millions of people. It was one of the biggest companies to do that. And so in the 90s, as more and more people were getting home computers and internet connections, we always had the best stuff in our house before anybody else, because my dad worked for that company. And so he would either get stuff at a discount or, they'd send him home with it or whatever. And so we always had some cool computer stuff, more than a lot of my friends in elementary school did. And I remember logging onto the internet and AOL Instant Messenger in 1995 when I was in like kindergarten or first grade. I was playing multiplayer video games on my computer when I was in middle school, which is like normal now, but in the early 2000s was like a very not normal thing for a teenager to be doing. It was not mainstream yet. A bunch of my friends were kind of just getting on the internet, and I was already, playing some multiplayer games or whatever. I was on MySpace kind of before all of my friends. I was teaching myself how to code HTML websites when I was in middle school. So all that's to say is like I was kind of surfing the internet, as we used to say, at a far younger age than even a lot of kids are today. A lot of kids today, are doing that sort of thing at the same age, at that elementary school or middle school age. So that's a little bit more normal now, but I was doing that back when it was like, nobody was doing that kind of thing. Professionally, I spent the first 7 years of my career from 2013 to 2020 leading social media strategy at one of the largest Christian publishers in the world in Nashville, Tennessee, that was called Lifeway Christian Resources. In the first 4 years of my time at Lifeway, I was responsible for all, sorry, my last four, not the first four. In the last four, I was responsible for all the social media managers and all the social media accounts that we had. So at one point, around 2017, 2018, we had 60 social media managers and 270 social media accounts. And all of them were kind of my responsibility. I wasn't posting to all of them, but if something went haywire on one of them, I would get a phone call. So that was a lot of my professional life for a number of years.
And so I don't want to interrupt you.
Yeah, no, you're good.
But I just think that being such a staggering number, 270. So are you managing individuals' accounts at that point, or like staff members,
Sure,
teachers, professors? How do you get to 270?
Yeah, so this is Lifeway Christian Resources. So we, at the time I took over in 2016, we still had 170 bookstores around the country, and we had a ton of books and some executives. No authors, they all handled their own stuff. I mean, we would coach them, but they would all actually manage it. There was a time in the halcyon days of the early 2010s when a book launched, you'd create a Twitter account for it. Or when a new Bible study launched, you'd create an Instagram account for it. There was a time when that made sense strategically. Nowadays, that would be foolish. But back then, it made a lot of sense and everybody was doing it. So we had a ton of social media accounts for like individual products, and every single Lifeway Christian bookstore had a Facebook page, which was great. It was a great ministry tool for the store managers and employees to be able to communicate with people in their community. But you can imagine from my perspective, kind of sitting at HQ, trying to keep tabs on all of that was near impossible. So that's where that number and part of my job when I took the reins was like, guys, we gotta cut this down. Like it was like we gotta go from like 270. Can we get to like 150? can we take it down a notch? So that I was able to cut that down. But yeah, it was a lot. I was posting the content to the main at Lifeway Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, but the other ones I was just kind of trying to keep a watchful eye on. And I had a big tool. It's called Hootsuite. It's one of the tools where you can manage social media, where I could see every post posted by every single account in one screen. And so that's what I spent a lot of my time doing. And I don't know if you guys remember, but I was doing this from 2016 through 2020. It wasn't exactly a peaceful time, culturally speaking. So it was raucous. It was a lot. Anyway, so I oversaw social media during the 2016 election, the closing. We eventually closed all of those bookstores. If you know anything about that, that was really hard. And running social media during that period was very difficult. And then I was running social media at the beginning of the coronavirus pandemic in 2020. And so it was a pretty awful time to be overseeing social media at with public relations at a Christian publishing house. People were finding reasons to be mad at us left and right. My team and I were kind of learning to be professional PR firefighters, even though none of us really had a background in that. That's just kind of what happened. And it was during that time that I really started to study social media at a sociological level. I've been doing a lot of studying of how can we do a good job on Facebook as a publisher? How can we do a good job on Twitter as a publisher? Strategy, I'd been doing a lot of research and study on that. But I was never really looking into what is social media doing to us? How is it changing us, affecting us spiritually? And it was during that period, that hard 4 years of having that sort of Sauron's all-seeing eye on all of this stuff, that I was like, man, I really, just from my perch, seeing all of this activity and all the ways people would respond to us and frankly get mad at us. And we had Christians cussing us out on social media. And I'm just like, what? How does this work? I'm confused. That I really started to study social media on a deeper level. And so, I could tell you how to make just about anything go viral on Twitter or how to grow a YouTube channel, but I started to ask a lot of deeper questions. So through my own experience and a rereading of Neil Postman's 1985 book, Amusing Ourselves to Death, I began to realize just how deeply social media was impacting not only my heart and mind, and it was, but also the hearts and minds of Christians and broader culture. I said a number of times in the last few years that Neil Postman's Amusing Ourselves to Death is there's no more relevant book today. if you want to read a great book on social media, before you read mine, go read Neil Postman's Amusing Ourselves to Death. And you might think, wait, it was written in 1985. That's not a social media book, which is true on a shallow, like basic level. But if you read Amusing Ourselves to Death, you will not have a hard, even though he never talks about the internet, you will not have a hard time connecting those dots. It's crazy how much of that book, which is mostly about like how the television is influencing culture, it's crazy how much of it like holds true and is frankly kind of prophetic about our lives today. The central premise of that book, you could say, is that while we all fear living in George Orwell's 1984, which is like a world in which that which we hate comes to rule over us, like Big Brother, that's kind of the premise of 1984. What Postman says is, yeah, we're all afraid of that, but honestly, we should all be a little bit more afraid of Aldous Huxley's Brave New World, which the thesis of that book is we're not going to be ruled by that which we hate. We're going to be ruled by that which we love. And what Huxley talks about, and the way Postman summarizes it, is that no one's going to have to burn any books, which is the fear of 1984, right? That they're going to come burn books and all of that. No one's going to have to burn any books because no one's going to be reading them anyway. And I'm like, yeah, that's definitely more of where we're at. Like, again, I'm a book guy too, right? So like, it's hard to get afraid about people burning books when would anybody really care if people burn books? That's kind of where we're at as a culture. And so that's the inspiration of kind of what I want to say to you today. I think if left unchecked, our relationship with social media will lead us to be enslaved by our desires and prevent us from glorifying God with our whole lives. So I want to be clear before we get too far, and I think I said this a little bit last time too. I am not anti-social media. I'm not at all. You're going to hear a lot of negativity about social media in the next 40 minutes or so, but I am not anti-social media. I really am not. I promise. And what I'm about to say you might hop off the call and say this guy's crazy. But like my favorite social media platform right now is TikTok. It is. It's my favorite. Because it reminds me so much of Vine, which is my favorite social media platform ever. It's like short form video. I think especially just like people who know how to be funny in like really short videos is just so fun. And I watch a YouTube show about almost every morning when I'm eating my breakfast and answering my emails when I first get to work. I still use Facebook and Instagram to keep up with my friends and family abroad. My wife and I are both from Indiana and we live in Nashville. So you better believe we're using social media to keep up with people back home. And I still use what's left of Twitter because there's never really been a better social media platform that's as good for finding breaking news as that one. And I need to know if my Chicago Cubs are ever going to sign some big name free agents. So I'm a big Cubs fan. So Twitter's a great place to keep up with sports news or, stuff like that. I really do love a lot about social media. I hope that's clear maybe from what I just said. However, as I have worked in social media professionally and as I've studied its sort of wide ranging negative effects, I've tried to set aside my personal love for social media in order to kind of accurately assess its very real role as what I think is a cancer in our culture at large, because I really think that's what it has become. And my request of you tonight, if you're maybe feeling a little defensive or apprehensive because you too like social media, is try to like set aside your love for social media as we dig into maybe some of the deeper, grosser parts of how the sausage is made, if you will, however you want to think of it. Because again, as I say, I really do enjoy certain aspects of it. I use some social media platform most days, but I try not to let that affection, if you will, cloud a deeper, more honest look. I think we can engage social media wisely, but I really do think that social media has had a net negative on society as a whole. I think it's desensitized us in horrifying ways. It's eroded social trust. It's made civil discourse nearly impossible. We can love social media personally while also recognizing these difficult truths. And I think it's important that we don't turn a blind eye to all of social media's faults, even as we enjoy its benefits. So my goal tonight is to not convince you to stop using social media. I don't expect any of you to go home and delete your accounts. I haven't done that for the most part. I have deleted my Twitter, but that's beside the point. My goal tonight is maybe to help you just be more wise users of social media. As I'll say in a minute, use social media rather than let social media use you. And that's a big difference. So let's look at 3 ways we can use social media without losing ourselves, without losing our center, without losing our sense of self, without losing our purpose, and of course, without losing our faith in the God of the universe. So first, recognize that you're the product, not the customer. You're the product, not the customer. There's an old saying that says, if it's free, you're the product. And the more accurate way to say that regarding social media is, if it's free, your data is the product. So I'm 33 years old, which you probably could put together if you heard me say my birth year before. And as of September, I am a parent to 2 girls. Magnolia will be 4 in April, like I said, and Daisy is just over 4 months old. Right now, this is what my day looks like. Wake up, read my Bible, parent, because my daughter, I wake up at 5:15. My daughter is usually, Maggie is up at about 6:15 or 6:30. So I get her breakfast and get her, playing. We're working on sight words right now. She's starting to be able to read some like 2 and 3 letter words, which I'm really excited about. And so we'll work together on that. I'll feed her. We'll kind of hang out in the morning. Then I work. And actually I work, fun fact, we have a pretty small house and couldn't afford to go get a 4-bedroom house when we had our second kid, and I work from home. So we built a shed in our backyard. So I work, this room that I'm in is in a little lean-to shed in my backyard. And so I help make breakfast and get my daughter going and doing an activity or whatever. I do that. By 7 o'clock, I'm out here at my desk, eating breakfast, watching YouTube, and doing email. I'm doing that from probably 7 to 7:30, kind of getting my day started at work. Then I work all day. I get off work at about 4:30. I parent, eat some dinner, and then I go to bed. That's basically it. That is what my day looks like. Of course, I'm not getting any sympathy from parents in the room. I recognize that, and that's fine. Of course, it isn't like that every day, but that is what it's like most days. And honestly, it's really hard for me. Why? Because I have so many hobbies and things that I like to do. I love to read books. I love to write books. I like to watch sports. I like to play video games. I like to hang out with my friends, and so much more. I have virtually no time right now to engage in any of that. It's very hard. Sometimes I can watch a Purdue game while I'm holding my 4-month-old daughter. Like that's fine. Sometimes I do have the energy to read a book, but frankly, a lot of times these days, when it's time for, I'm usually getting in bed at about 9 o'clock to let myself read for a half an hour or so. But a lot of times, frankly, lately, I'm getting in bed at 9 o'clock and just falling right asleep. I'm not getting a whole lot of reading done lately. But despite all of that, and despite my frustration with not having enough time to do the fun things that I like to do, sometimes what happens between putting Maggie to sleep around 7 o'clock and me falling asleep around 8:30 or 9 o'clock from exhaustion, I often find some time to sit across the living room from my wife and mindlessly scroll on TikTok or Twitter. Somehow, despite my lack of energy, despite my desire to play some of my Nintendo Switch or read a book or work on my own novel that I'm trying to work on, I do manage to waste 30 minutes to an hour mindlessly scrolling on social media. It happens. I do it. I do the zombie scroll. And maybe you have some version of the zombie scroll like I just described, whether you're a parent or not. But tonight I want to encourage you in the same way I've had to kind of admonish myself. We need to do less lazy scrolling and more intentional scrolling. We need to scroll with a critical mind and not a passive one. I think a lot of what social media users don't realize is that we're really like lab rats in a science experiment. And when we scroll passively, we are totally oblivious to that reality. I'm going to get a little technical here, so don't let your eyes glaze over, because I think a lot of this is going to sound maybe familiar, but I'm going to dig a little bit deeper than maybe you've thought before. At the heart of virtually every social media platform is an algorithmic feed. You've heard of the algorithm, the quote unquote capital A algorithm, as if it's like a person or something. An algorithm, to get very technical for 3 seconds, and then we'll get back to only semi-technical. An algorithm is really just a very complex mathematical equation that takes a bunch of variables, which when it comes to social media is signals that you like of you liking or disliking certain kinds of content. And it's just like, if you can imagine a mathematical equation, I'm not a math guy, but you just have all these variables, and it's like, oh, Susie liked that. She didn't like that. She spent 3 seconds watching that video. She spent 3 minutes watching that video. Oh, she stopped scrolling for 5 seconds on that photo. She must like that person or miss that family member. All of those variables are on the left side of the equal sign, and on the right side of the equal sign is that endless feed of content that is what you receive on your social media feed. So an algorithm is just a really complex math equation that says, take all these signals of things the user likes or doesn't like, and on the other end, spit out a never-ending feed of content that will keep them engaged for as long as possible. That's what it is. Through these algorithmically curated feeds of content, we're being prompted and prodded and poked, told that life is happening all around us, and we better check in to see what everyone's doing with their lives and what everyone thinks about the pictures of our kids, because if we don't, we might miss out on something important. Like a rat that gets a treat when it pushes a lever, we're rewarded with a little red notification bubble or a delightful ding if we're obedient and open the app like we're told. We think we're choosing to just check in, but we aren't. Our behavior has been so modified, our brains so deeply hacked, as the first president of Facebook, Sean Parker. If you've ever seen The Social Network, he's the guy who Justin Timberlake acts as. Sean Parker is the guy who started Napster, the illegal music downloading service. He stepped in to be the first president of Facebook. You know that if you've seen The Social Network, and if you haven't seen The Social Network, that's a little education for you. He talks about how the goal of those at the beginning and still today of those early social media pioneers was to hack the brains of their users, using that language. So we think we're choosing to check in, but we're not. Our brains have been hacked. We don't see it as a problem. It's just how things are now. So how does it work? How are we drawn into the addiction? We're manipulated by the algorithms that play on our favorite social media platforms and the content on them. So let me explain how Facebook works, just as an example, because it is the biggest one. The primary goal of Facebook is to make money, and that's fair. It's the right of any company in our United States capitalist economy to do that. The primary way Facebook makes money is by selling ads, because they don't charge you anything. The way Facebook sells so many ads is by capturing the data and attention of more people than any other social media platform, or frankly, any other thing in the world. So Facebook needs to keep people using the platform in order to keep the value of its ads high. You know, the reason Super Bowl ads cost $8 million for 30 seconds or whatever it is because 123 million people watch the Super Bowl. Facebook is the most valuable real estate, like the Facebook feed is the most valuable real estate on the internet. And so it doesn't cost $8 million to run a video on Facebook, but it costs a lot of money as far as internet advertising goes to run ads on Facebook, because so many people are there and they're always looking and they're always watching. Like I said, the primary goal is to make money, and that's fine. But the way they do that, the way they make the most money is by keeping people on the platform for as long as possible. In the same way that the Super Bowl makes a ton of money because so many eyes are watching it, Facebook ads are more valuable and they make more money when more people are on the platform for a longer period of time. The question you might ask is, okay, so how does Facebook even keep people on its platform? How does it go about doing that? It's not like making you open the app, or so we think. This is a good question. Facebook has engineered the platform in a number of ways to keep people from scrolling, but one rises above them all: divisiveness. In 2018, an internal investigation at Facebook reported that, quote, our algorithms, this is Facebook's internal investigation. They reported that our algorithms exploit the human brain's attraction to divisiveness. That investigation also revealed that the Facebook algorithm is designed to deliver, quote, more and more divisive content in an effort to gain user attention and increase time on the platform. Facebook's own investigation reported that its algorithm, that secret mathematical equation, it's like the 11 herbs and spices. All these platforms keep their algorithm secret because it's like their secret sauce or their secret recipe. So it's kind of the secret algorithm. We know it's there. We know they use it. They talk about it, but we don't know all the signals and all that. It's designed to just, like, their own study said that it is designed to serve you more and more divisive content in an effort to keep your attention and keep you on the platform for as long as possible. The results of that study, that internal study done by Facebook, were presented internally and shelved, put away. They buried the research. No one outside of Facebook knew about that presentation until the Wall Street Journal reported about it in the spring of 2020. And I don't know if you remember, but there was something else really big going on in the world in the spring of 2020, and it kind of got lost. Facebook knows that the most reliable way to keep its users scrolling is to make them mad. So, I mean, just think about it. I mean, we're going into another election year right now. Like, if you find yourself mad on Facebook, before you just like fire off that really angry comment or that message to a friend, or you share that piece of content like makes you feel good because it makes you angry about the candidate you don't like or whatever, consider that you're being played. Like, consider that you're being manipulated, because that's truly how this stuff works. Facebook knows, again, that the whole way to keep the best way to keep you on platform on its app is to make you mad. Divisive content leads to more engagement than unifying content. So is it any wonder that Facebook's its money making engine, the algorithm, is engineered to stoke divisiveness? The more they do that, the more money they make. This kind of strategy is advantageous to Facebook's business model, but harmful to the wellness of its users. And that is a trade that Facebook has happily made throughout its existence. And we'll get into that in a few minutes here. This is just one example of how social media platforms take advantage of us. The goals of these platforms go far beyond connecting the users of the world for the greater good of mankind, as so many of their sort of mission statements sound. It just so happens that connecting users for the good of mankind is also incredibly lucrative, and a generation of massive amounts of wealth and revenue by connecting users often comes at the cost of the good of mankind. But I have a couple more examples for you. Again, we're kind of picking on Facebook. Meta, if you don't remember, basically because Facebook acquired Instagram and then they acquired WhatsApp, which is like the international worldwide texting app, they created a new shell company called Meta to kind of encompass all of them. And that also speaks to like their VR and metaverse aspirations as well. So Facebook and Meta, I'm using them interchangeably, though technically Facebook is one part of Meta. So just so we're clear on terminology. I'm picking on them a little bit, but they're really kind of the chief offenders and like forerunners of all of this. They're kind of like the prototype, if you will. In October 2023, just a few months ago, 42 United States attorneys general sued Facebook Meta by, quote, alleging that the company knowingly designed and deployed harmful features on Instagram and Facebook to purposefully addict children and teens. 1 month later, late in the night, on the Wednesday before Thanksgiving, Facebook and Meta unsealed the redacted documents from that lawsuit in hopes that no news media would catch it heading into the long holiday weekend. This is a common practice, but I caught it, as did some others. And I'd like to briefly show you just a few snippets of those documents, just to give you like what I've said in the last 20 minutes is not some like harebrained conspiracy theory, which is sometimes how I've been received, at least in the past, when so many of us who study this stuff have long had like circumstantial evidence that Facebook is actively trying to manipulate us without like hard forensic evidence, if you will. And this is like actually court evidence that's going before judges to be tried, because it's the best evidence we've ever seen. Because here's a little caveat, little rant, not mini rant. One of my biggest pet peeves as I've worked in the social media space is people like to say social media is a neutral tool. We just use it poorly because we're sinners. And the second part of that is true. We use social media poorly because we're sinners, 100%. Social media is not a neutral tool. It's like a tool bent toward sin. It's not like we discovered social media in the bottom of the ocean and like, oh my gosh, look at this tool. It's untainted by sin. It's like, no, like the social media is invented by sinners. But even more, like that's just as like broadly, if you have a tool, a communication service invented by sinners, it's going to have sin baked into it naturally. But then also, as I just kind of described with the one example from Facebook, and as I'll show again here in a second, these platforms are designed to be used poorly, to be used sinfully. Like if you just go back to the divisiveness, Facebook wants people to be angry at each other on Facebook because it makes them more money. So they're incentivizing divisiveness and like making angry content pop up more at the top of your feed than kind content. So that's not a neutral tool. That's the tool putting its finger on the scale toward anger and hatred and divisiveness. So just let me be clear about that. If you think social media is a neutral tool, it's definitely not. So first slide here. This is, I'm just going to read some of this. The vice president of analytics, Alex Schultz, added, fundamentally, we have abused, is this the right? Yeah, okay. Let me see. Okay, here's the right one. Meta has acknowledged the importance of its young user market by quantifying those users' values in internal correspondence. So emails at Facebook going back and forth about the value of a teenage user. So in internal email in September 2018 showed that Meta characterized its youngest users, their 13-year-olds, in terms of lifetime value, how much they're worth to Facebook, defined the cumulative total profit expected from a user. So, quote, the lifetime value of a 13-year-old teen is roughly $270 per teen. That email went on to caution, this number is core to making decisions about your business, and accordingly, you do not want to spend more than the lifetime value of the user. So what that is saying is like, spend up to $270 to attract a teenager and you'll make a profit over the course of time based on how much attention they give. So that's just one, like, they're quantifying people in terms of how much money they're worth to the company. Second, this one is particularly concerning. In 2020, an internal Meta presentation described Meta's efforts to study adolescent biology and neuroscience in order to, quote, gain valuable, unchanging insights to inform product strategy today, noting that, quote, teens' decisions and behaviors are mostly driven by emotion, the intrigue of novelty and reward. Teens are insatiable when it comes to feel-good dopamine effects, and Instagram has a pretty good hold on the serendipitous aspect of discovery through our Explore feature, the little magnifying glass function. And every time one of our teen users finds something unexpected, their brains deliver them a dopamine hit. Further, it said, it may be a problem if Facebook seems to be rewarding users based on the principle of unpredictability while the inherent value of reward is lacking. And it goes on to describe some more strategy business. But the point of this is Facebook is hiring and or consulting with adolescent biologists, neuroscientists to study adolescent brains to figure out how do we keep these teenagers hooked on our platform, specifically Instagram for teenagers. This is where I just get really passionate about. This goes a little bit into our conversation from last time about how, like, parents going up against these platforms can't do it on their own. You know, there's a lot of conversation about how should we keep these companies in check? And I'm not one to typically argue for like more government intervention into things. But at this point, like, we cannot expect truly a parent, even a Christian, present, the best parent of a 13-year-old boy or girl you could think of. We can't expect them to basically go toe to toe with one of the biggest companies in the world, who has hired, either on staff or as consultants, teams of adolescent biologists and neuroscientists to figure out how to addict their teenagers. How can we expect a parent of a 13-year-old in Lafayette or Rensselaer to feasibly keep their teen off of social media or have a healthy relationship with it? We need, like, parents need help. And like, it's not just the church that's going to step in. Parents even banding together is going to do something, but not solve it. I think I'm more and more convinced that we need strong government regulation on these companies, because I don't think parents can do it on their own. And I think something needs to step in, and I don't know of any better solution. So anyway, that's just a little bit of a rant on that. But back to this. This is on abusing notifications for the sake of engagement. So the vice president of analytics, Alex Schultz, added that fundamentally, I believe that we have abused the notifications channel as a company. They went on to talk about how the biggest indicator of daily active users is basically how many notifications people are getting. And I'm not gonna read that word for word, but all of that's to say, the little red notification bubble. Last time we talked about some practical ways to have a better relationship with social media, and maybe this will come up again in our Q&A time this time. But I advocated for turning off all notifications, because as this interaction described, you have one guy who's saying, hey, I think we're abusing this notifications channel and doing it too much because it's hindering the user experience. And then Mark Zuckerberg coming back and basically saying, we can't send fewer notifications, because sending notifications is how we get people to use the app most effectively. And so that just kind of goes back to that rat in the experiment pressing the lever or whatever. You feel like you're choosing to check in, but you're really being kind of seduced to check in. And it's just, there are some of the most talented and well-paid, probably, biologists and neuroscientists in the world who are being consulted to get you to do that. And so this is where I just kind of want to make the point. You are not the customer, you are the product. The customer is the advertiser and others. Meta, Facebook, Instagram regularly chooses profits over the mental health of its users, especially young people. We are the product, not the customer. My second point tonight is this. Use social media, don't let it use you. Use social media and don't let it use you. That idea might sound a little silly, or maybe you know exactly what I mean. I don't know. But I do think you probably know what it looks like to be used by social media. Maybe you have a family member who scrolls Facebook at every family gathering and can't help but share whatever wacky content they come across. Or maybe you have a friend who takes tons of pictures when they go on vacation, and shares them, and they share them on Instagram throughout the year to make it look like they're always traveling, to kind of make themselves look like they're living this amazing life or something. Or maybe you regularly find yourself scrolling on your phone at the dinner table, missing out on valuable FaceTime with your family. Social media uses us by being central to our lives in a way that's unhealthy. We find ourselves bound to an app or a set of apps, and we open them without even knowing why. And sometimes because we feel obligated, not even because we want to. There's this guy named Bo Burnham. He's a comedian, director, songwriter. Bo and I are about the same age. And I remember watching his earliest YouTube videos when we were in high school around 2007. I don't recommend going to watch his stuff. It's quite vulgar. Let me I'm not broadly endorsing Bo Burnham, though I do think his Netflix special that came out at the end of the pandemic is a really insightful, like, cutting critique of culture. It is quite vulgar, so please know that I'm putting that disclaimer out there. But I don't know if anyone listening on the call has ever heard of David Foster Wallace, but he really reminds me a lot of him. He was the kind of a cultural commentator and critic in the late 90s and early 2000s. And so anyway, he and I are about the same age. And back then, Bo Burnham was just a high school kid making some pretty vulgar comedy songs in his parents' house after school. And today he's a famous director and comedian with multiple Netflix specials and stuff like that. In 2018, he made his directorial debut, as a director for a movie, in a movie called 8th Grade. It's kind of one of those small artsy movies that a lot of people didn't see. And I didn't see it in theaters, but I eventually watched it. It's an awkwardly hilarious, crass, and realistic look at what it's like to be 8th grade in the 21st century. What's kind of ironic is the movie is rated R, and rightfully so. But so many critics and frankly teenagers that I've talked to have been like, man, this movie is an incredibly accurate depiction of what it's like to be in 8th grade today. And from watching it myself and working in student ministry for about 15 years, in the last 15 years, I would agree. But the movie's rated R, so an 8th grader couldn't even really go watch a movie that is a very accurate depiction of their experience. It's just kind of interesting culturally where we're at in that regard. But back when that movie was being released, Bo Burnham did a number of interviews, as you can imagine, and that typical thing. And he's asked, one of the main character in the movie is she's a teenage girl who's trying to kind of get a YouTube channel going. If you know any 8th graders, that's kind of a common aspiration. And so she's trying to get a YouTube channel going. So he has a good bit of good commentary about social media and its effects on us, especially teenagers, in the movie. So somebody asked him, they said, hey, how do you think our relationship with the social media is warping our understanding of reality? And I thought his answer is very good. He says, what is the feeling of walking through your life and not just living your life, which is already difficult and impossible, but also taking inventory of your life, being a viewer of your own life, living an experience, and at the same time hovering behind yourself and watching yourself live that experience, being nostalgic for moments that haven't even happened yet, planning your future to look back on it. This is the disorienting power of the opportunity we feel to have to constantly be reshaping ourselves on the internet. And I think that is just a beautiful, sad explanation of what it can feel like, that sort of dissociation that can come with trying to live online and live offline. And that can be a symptom of what it looks like if social media is using us rather than us using social media ourselves. When you can be anyone at any time, who are you? When you try to be anyone at any time, are you anyone really? Our relationship with social media distorts our understanding of purpose, because when we reshape our identity at will, we lose track of what we're here to do. This doesn't always or even look like people living shady double lives on the internet and in their communities. It's not quite like that. sometimes people just see offline life and online life as two different planes of reality, which I think I talked about a little bit last time we were together. And I think that's what it looks like to be used by social media. In my most recent book, The Wolf in Their Pockets, I share a spectrum at the beginning of the book that depicts 3 postures we have when we engage with social media. Here's that spectrum. On either end of the spectrum are more unhealthy postures. In the middle is we have what I would call a healthy posture. So I'm going to briefly explain those. On the left, we have uncritical embrace. This is where youngish people find ourselves on the spectrum. We uncritically embrace social media. We don't ask any hard questions like, what is it doing with my data? Or how is it affecting my spiritual life? We just kind of say, oh, there's a new social media app. Of course, I'll say yes to all the terms of service and terms and conditions. And of course, I'll just use it willy-nilly and not care anything about any of the implications. That is the general posture of uncritical embrace. We don't think critically. We just embrace whatever comes along and say, sure, I'll sign up for it and try it out. Why not? What harm could it do? On the right, we have passive ignorance. This posture is going to be a little less common among younger people and a bit more common among those who are maybe baby boomers and older. These people are more passively ignorant about social media, those who find themselves in this posture. They think like, social media is not a big deal. It's not real life. It's unimportant. Like, who really cares? When I first started working in social media back in 2013, I had a very well-meaning family member, very successful uncle, who's like very successful businessman, makes more money than I'll probably ever see in my life. He asked my wife and I, like, should you really be getting a job in social media? Like, isn't it kind of a fad? This was in 2013. Facebook had about 1 billion users at the time and definitely has more now. But no, social media was not a fad, but that was just kind of him. Like, he was a little passively ignorant. It doesn't mean you're dumb or stupid or anything like that. You're just kind of like, this whole social media thing, is it really I don't know. Is it a thing? That's more being passively ignorant. You just kind of try to stick your head in the sand or just kind of look the other way and it's not a big deal. Both uncritical embrace and passive ignorance are dangerous, I think, for different reasons and perhaps to different intensities, but both are a problem. I think a right healthy relationship with social media is right in the middle, intentional engagement, where uncritical embrace loves social media a little bit too much and is blind to its negative effects. Someone who has a posture of intentional engagement might use social media, but they have a sobering reality of what social media is and can do. Where passive ignorance believes social media is irrelevant and not really a part of real life, the person who has a posture of more intentional engagement kind of understands the power. Even if they don't use social media, they have a real understanding of its power. To intentionally engage social media, I want to be clear, does not even mean you have to have accounts. I think you can intentionally engage social media just by keeping up with it in the news and reading articles about how it's impacting culture. I don't think, oh, you don't have a Facebook account? Well, you're ignorant. No. I think to be ignorant would just be to ignore it totally. I think you can intentionally engage social media and be off of it totally. Just kind of keep an eye on what it's doing and how it's affecting the people you love and your community. So I think what I advocate for is using social media on your own terms. And what does that mean? We've talked about this before, but I think you turn off all social media notifications. I think when we have those turned on, we're being beckoned to use social media apps on their terms rather than choosing to use them on our terms. You see a little red dot attached to your home screen or that ding or whatever vibration. Oh, someone's DM'd you. Who could it be? Better check in the middle of coffee with your best friend. I know you're in the middle of taking a test, but shouldn't you see who just snapped you on Snapchat? You probably should grab your phone in the middle of worshiping at church just to make sure that buzz wasn't anything important. These are how our, not only social media, but phones generally kind of beckon us to use them rather than us deciding on our own volition when and how to use them. In a 2020 study, a study was done about how even the presence of a smartphone can distract us from whatever should be in front of us. So I won't read the quote from the study that I have because it's a little long, but even just having one like face down on the table in front of us can be distracting to a conversation, even if you're not doing anything with it. I think we should take note of that, and that's important. Third and finally, and then I will leave time for questions. Remember that everyone is made in the image of God, including yourself. I'm not going to spend a ton of time here because I think a lot of you probably know what I'm trying to say, but I think it's important that we remind ourselves of these things. So let's start with a basic, glorious theological truth. We are all made in the image of God. This is too easy for us to take for granted. I think we often forget that God didn't breathe his breath of life into any other being in the way he did with us. Only we humans reflect the creator as his image bearers. We're set apart to have dominion over all God created so we can steward it for his glory. We have an inherent value that no other feature of God's creation has. Even though all of his creation is valuable, we're set apart. Humanity is a cut above every beautiful mountain peak, every vibrant autumn leaf, and every lovable, snuggly dog. Nothing on earth compares to us, the pinnacle of God's creation, his image bearers. What makes our status as image bearers so wonderful, besides the inherent value it gives us as the pinnacle of God's creation, is that it's true of every single one of us, no matter what. Rich people and poor people, both made in the image of God. People of every skin color and ethnic background are made in the image of God. Muslims and Christians are both made in the image of God. You don't have to acknowledge God to be made in his image. Everyone is made in the image of God. Murderers, adulterers, racists, idolaters, every sinner and cultural outcast you can possibly imagine is made in the image of God. Nothing can take away our status as image bearers, no matter how poorly we may image him at times, because our status as image bearers is a gracious gift of God inherent to our DNA. We can't unearn this status before God that we never earned to begin with. And that's an amazing grace. N.T. Wright is a Christian scholar and theologian, and he writes about bearing the image of God like this. Our task as image-bearing, God-loving, Christ-shaped, spirit-filled Christians, following Christ and shaping our world, is to announce redemption to the world that has discovered its fallenness, to announce healing to the world that has discovered its fallenness, and to announce healing to the world that has discovered its brokenness, to proclaim love and trust to the world that only knows exploitation, fear, and suspicion. Beyond all of the algorithmic manipulation and crippling addiction that's wrapped up in social media, like we've already explored tonight, probably the most troubling aspect of social media to me is that it makes it terrifyingly easy to forget the imago Dei in other people, and frankly ourselves too. Social media blurs the image of God in us such that when we are treated like wells of data to be mined by companies so they can make hundreds of billions of dollars a year in profit, social media makes it difficult for us to see the image of God in other people, because when we're separated by a couple screens and hundreds of miles, it's easier to treat someone as less than human when they hold an opinion we don't like. And social media can so easily lead us to forget that we're image bearers when we see how beautiful or perfect other people appear to be. And we wonder secretly and silently, why do they get to be pretty and perfect, but I'm stuck being me? As much as I truly enjoy certain aspects of social media, the more I use it, the more I'm convinced that social media is at its best when we remember we're the product, when we use it on our own terms, and we don't let it fog our view of the image of God in each other or in ourselves. I can say a lot more, but I think I'm going to leave it there. And I want to leave, we have 30 minutes for questions and or discussion of any kind. So I'll stop sharing my screen and happy to address anything. Yep.
Thanks, Chris. And I know just from reading the book, I know that, what you just shared was like a few sentences from the book, basically overall. So
yeah,
I know there's so much more that could be discussed, and the goal of this particular webinar isn't to cover all that material because that just wouldn't be feasible. But I'm hoping that as you highlight some of these key points that you're making, that it will help people to have a more accurate picture of social media, of how it affects us. I'm one that, in the past has viewed social media more as a neutral tool, like you're saying. And
I used to as well, for what it's worth.
I think there's a sense in which ultimately we are responsible for how we use it.
Totally.
But the other side of the coin is that it is, based on just the things you shared tonight, it's clearly not a neutral tool. It has, there is evil intentions behind all of it to benefit the owners, not to benefit the users. And so I think what you said initially, recognize you're the product, not the customer. I think it, just that particular statement can change a lot of the things that you might be thinking about social media. So just something we need to recognize. If we don't understand that, then like you said, we're just We're just the rat that keeps going to get a piece of cheese, and that's all we really think about. And I never had heard of, you kind of used sausage as a way to describe social media. I don't remember that being in the book.
No.
But so I guess you could say social media is, it's kind of like a hot dog. It tastes good, but you don't want to know what's in it.
That's
And
right. That's a good
and
example. Yeah.
that's kind of what they, the owners of these corporations are doing. They don't want you to know the reality of what will happen if you consume it.
Yeah.
But while we're consuming it, we're just thinking about how good it tastes. We're not thinking about what it's doing to us, or what, how it's affecting us. So I guess I had a few questions I was going to ask. If anyone else has any additional questions, don't hesitate to send them to me. But one of the things I wanted to ask was, just thinking back that time period you mentioned, obviously between 2016 and 2020, just the major cultural things that were happening. How much did the COVID pandemic, I don't want to just ask how much it increased people's usage of social media, because that in and of itself isn't going to be a surprise, but was there anything that came out of the COVID pandemic and how that probably drove people to spending so much more time on social media that led to some negative consequences that have been studied?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I don't know. I'm trying to think off the top of my head. I can't think of like a like formal study that's been done on this. Frankly, it might be a little bit hard to do
Right,
something like that just because there were so many stressors and extenuating factors around the pandemic.
right,
To be able to pinpoint social media as the cause of anything might be a little bit difficult. However, I can speak anecdotally from my experience, not just using social media, because while I think a lot of us would say, maybe not, social media was in a sense a lifeline during that period. Everybody handled the pandemic differently and stayed stayed at home more or less than others, or masked more or less than others. I can just share. I'm going to share a little personal, and then I'll get a little bit broader. Um, our daughter Maggie was born April 6th, 2020. So to give you an idea of the weird time that was, she was due April 13th and was on track to come around her due date. But the pandemic was starting. We actually were at our pre-birthing class like February 27th. It was my wife's birthday. And the nurse said, I'm about to go to Italy on a vacation for a couple weeks, but I'm hearing they've got some kind of virus over there, and I'm not really sure if we should go. That was the end of February, right?
Hmm.
And then the world falls apart March 13th, when all of that, that's when the hammer really came down publicly in the United States. And over the course of the second half of March, there were a couple reports. They ended up being a little bit overblown and inflated. There were a couple reports of hospitals not allowing fathers to be present for the births of their children. That there was a lot of noise made about it. We actually learned that only happened like in a few instances, but you can imagine there was a lot of noise about that. And we were 2 weeks away from our daughter's birth, and so my daughter's OB said, "Hey, you're good to come. You're good to have her a week early. Let's go ahead and get you induced a week early so that we know your husband will be able to be there." And so our daughter's birthday was, in a sense, decided because of COVID. And then it was such a weird time because at the time we knew it was a big deal, or we didn't know how it affected children. At that point, we didn't know. You could imagine, is an infant hyper vulnerable to this, or are they more resilient? We know now that they were actually quite resilient compared to other parts of the population. But at the time, you wouldn't. No one would have faulted you for thinking they're among the most vulnerable. And at the time, also, they didn't know that it was airborne. They thought it might still be surface. So everyone, including us, were hand sanitizing like crazy, but we were not required to wear masks because they didn't know that it was airborne. And so anyway, that was just the weird time that we were in. But we came home, and you better believe we barely left the house for like the next 6 months until we started learning that babies are actually pretty resilient.
Mm-hmm.
We guarded that baby with our lives. We had been trying to get pregnant for like over a year, and I'm like, I'm not about to lose my baby to a once in 3 lifetimes pandemic or whatever. So anyway, it was a really stressful time for us. And so we were kind of cloistered more than maybe the average person. And And I know that social media was kind of, in a sense, a lifeline for us to keep up with family who maybe weren't
Mm-hmm.
coming down to see the baby, who would have been present, who didn't come down until May or June, to keep up with our friends who we weren't seeing as regularly, people who were dropping us off meals at our front door that we were wiping down or whatever, right? Like, this was the weird world. But what was interesting to me, because I was writing about social media at the time, in fact, I was working on terms of service. I had just kind of gotten started writing it around the time Maggie was born. Previously, it had been very hard for me to have conversations with people about the negative side effects of social media, because we all knew the good stuff, but we hadn't really had our eyes opened to the limitations or the bad stuff yet.
Mm-hmm.
And what I found was, myself and hearing stories from others, is that while the coronavirus pandemic provided a way for social media, like for us to connect, not too long into it, 6 months, 8 months, 12 months, people started to kind of feel those limitations and feel burnt out, and
Mm-hmm.
start to see how it was dramatically negatively affecting their lives
Mm-hmm.
and their relationships with people, and kind of realizing like, man, this is great as like an escape valve or like an emergency valve to get social engagement when nothing else will do.
Mm-hmm.
But it cannot suffice. Like, it does not suffice. And so that's what I would say the pandemic revealed, was, hey, this can be a helpful tool, but man, it can only go so far. And once you get to that point, it can be really damaging. Not even so much in that divisive sense, so much as just like, it can start to be depressive. It can be like, it can start to hinder relationship rather than help it. And so I think a lot of folks, it became easier for me as a sort of social media critic or whatever you want to call it. People were a lot more open to hearing what I had to say after the pandemic than before the pandemic. And I think there's some lesson in that.
Because people had to use social media to that extent for that period of time to recognize it cannot replace in-person human relationships.
That's right.
So there might be a sense in which more people became addicted to social media during that time period, but there's also a sense in which more people came to see that social media has limitations, and that it can't replace in-person human relationships. Okay, well, that's helpful. So you mentioned a time period in your life, maybe it was the 2017 to 2018 time period, when would you have said at that point you had an unhealthy relationship with social media, or has there been a time in your life when you would say you had an unhealthy relationship with social media?
Totally. I would say, even like, in a sense, when I was on MySpace and Facebook in those early days before I had a smartphone, I would say I had an unhealthy relationship, but I was also like 14, right? So, yeah, like, I was a jerk to people on MySpace and Facebook when I was in middle and high school, but that's because I was a jerk. Like, I was a middle schooler and high schooler. So I don't even know, like, in a sense, I don't even blame like, I was just a squirrely teenager that was exercising that squirreliness on Facebook and the early social media platforms. But I would say my unhealthiest relationship with social media was when it was kind of my job, because I was having to engage with it all day at work. So it was kind of like a work hazard, if you will. But then also, like, I enjoyed using it at night. And so I would spend a lot of time reading tweets or whatever. TikTok wasn't around then, so I wasn't engaging that. But I'd spend a lot of time like engage. Twitter has long been my primary social media platform, and so I would just spend a lot of time engaging on Twitter, tweeting. I'm a writer, so at that point, I still use Twitter on like an anonymous account for some projects for work, but I don't use it as Chris anymore. But like, I used to tweet so much, like I never deleted tweets. I logged onto Twitter in 2008 and only recently have stopped. I think I had like 23,000 tweets. Like, I tweeted a ton. I would live tweet sporting events. Like, I just loved it. I loved it. And so I would engage Twitter a lot. I would say to an unhealthy extent. And I would get in theological fights on Twitter and stuff like that. I never much political fights, because I used to be interested in politics when I was in high school, but kind of stopped once I got to college. But I would get in theological squabbles all the time, or arguments about sports stuff or whatever. And so I would say that is probably, yeah, that 2017, 2018 period is when I was, even 2016 to 2018 is kind of when I was like at my unhealthiest relationship with social media. And then around, I would say around 2018, 2019, I actually deleted like every social media app from my phone. And so I would still engage social media. And this is actually a tip for anyone who wants to maybe not delete their accounts, but use it less. So I deleted all the apps from my phone for a period. And so I still used the social media platforms, but I would do it through like the Safari browser on my phone, which is possible, but it's like a way worse experience, right? Like it's slower or doesn't load as fast. And so I would still kind of get to use it. It was kind of a nice way to like engage it, but it was harder to like use it a lot or be like a power user. And so it was this nice like happy medium of, hey, I don't have to delete all my accounts, but by deleting all the apps and only using it like in my web browser on my phone, it made the experience annoying enough to where I would only use it here and there and not all the time. So I actually did that for a couple years. I want to say 2018 to 2020. And it's only been in the last few that I've like, I think developed a healthy, like I stepped far back enough away and it's not my job anymore. And I've maybe matured or by God's grace been sanctified enough to where like, I don't feel the need. Like I have the Twitter app on my phone, but I'm not on it all the time like I was. And I've set good time limits on my devices and stuff like that. So,
and part of it is you've got 2 kids now and less time. So
exactly. Definitely.
Even if you wanted to do it, it wouldn't be safe to be 100%. On social media while you're giving your daughter a bath kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
You could probably pull it off, but
yeah, they notice those things, man. And I've been very careful about that stuff of like it may not seem like my 3.5-year-old notices when I'm looking at Twitter while she wants to be playing with me, but she 100% notices.
Oh yeah.
So.
Yeah. And I was going to mention when you were talking about your 4-year-old, we were in the same case. Our daughter was born on May 7th of the same year. So a month after, your daughter was born and leading up to the birth, there were some of those same things going around that I may or may not be able to go to the hospital. So we were looking at other options and things that we might be able to possibly do. And yeah, it ended up being fine and everything. But I remember that sense and that feeling we had at that time, and how there was so much that was up in the air. So other than just the amount of time you were spending on social media, were there any other indications at that time that led you to see that, okay, I need to make some changes here? Does that make sense?
Yeah. Other than time. Yeah, I think like I like I had described, I think I was mean. I was like, I felt myself being shaped and like that divisiveness that I talked about, how like that Facebook is the primary culprit of doing that. But I think Twitter was making me feel divisive too. And I would see fights or like, arguments about theology or stuff like that. And I would just be like, well, I got to jump in and give my 2 cents because everyone wants to hear what I think. Right. And it's the temptation of social media is to think that you're the center of the world. Like it's the heart is an idol making factory, as someone said, Spurgeon, or I forget who said it.
Yeah.
And like social media is perfect to, engage that feeling and that sin. And so it's like one of the biggest fights that I have had with social media over the years is, oh, well, everyone cares about what I'm doing or what I'm saying or what I think. And so I should probably tell them and show them and engage. And so I would say, yeah, thinking back to it in that period, I was like, yeah, I was super prideful and like self-centered. And I think that was just my own sin. I don't think social media made me that way, but I think social media gave me the stage to act that out, if you will. And I gladly took it and just kind of ran with it. Yeah.
Like you said, I mean, you just, like all of us tend to do, you just kind of got sucked into it. Right?
Yeah, exactly.
And
yeah. It did exactly what
it's designed to do.
Exactly. It's not like I set out on a Thursday evening to be like, man, I can't wait to have a Twitter fight about the Trinity today. But like, I would sit down after dinner while we were watching a football game or watching a show and scroll and see what people are talking about. And be like, well, I got to jump in and throw my punches too, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And just so much like I lost the image of God in other people. Surely, my goodness, like that what I talked about, that losing the image of God. I mean, that it's so easy. It's so easy without again. You don't set out to do that. You don't. It's not something you try to do. I think it's giving a sinner a tool that's bent towards sin, and let's see what happens, and that's what happens, you know.
Yeah. It allows people, gives people a platform to say things that they would not say if someone was sitting across the desk from them.
That's right.
And so it's less personal, therefore it's easier to say things that you wouldn't say if the person was standing right next to you.
Yeah.
So besides, you said you basically deleted all of the apps at that time. Was there anything else that you did to correct the challenges you were having? Any other tips or tricks or even things that you do now to keep, checks and balances that you continue to use now to help your relationship to stay healthy?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think one of the things was, I think I talked about this last week, but setting like time limits, like using the screen time app. If you have an iPhone, I know Androids have it too. I'm just not an Android user, so I can't speak from experience, but using the screen time function on your Apple devices to where you can not only set a certain amount of time you get to spend on an app or set of apps, because it knows what social media apps are. And so you can set a time limit of like an hour a day. The average American adult uses social media for 2.5 hours a day. Whether or not you think that's healthy, whatever, but that's the average American adult. So say you want to be less than average and you want to spend 2 hours a day. You could set a thing on your phone to not allow you to spend more than 2 hours a day on social media. And the apps will lock down and not let you in after that period of time, an hour, whatever else. The other thing you can do, so I've done that. The other thing you can do is, I'm not currently doing that because there's no way I'm spending 2 hours a day on social media right now anyway, or anything close to that. The other thing that I have, and I actually still do have this in play, is you can set up your phone to not allow certain apps to be available at certain times of day. So I have set up to where, like I said, I'm up at 5:15. I don't really start working until 7. And so I have set it up so that I can't really use social media between 5 and 7, or before 7 a.m. Or like after, I forget if it's 8:30 or 9 o'clock, my social media apps kind of shut down. And so unless I get permission or override from my wife or whatever, I'm trying not to use social media during that time. So you can, it's good to not engage those things right before bed, or when you get up in the morning, you want to set some time aside for the Lord, or just for more enriching activities generally, whatever that is. And here's the key. And this is where, like, I've done this at some points and I've not done this at some points, but if you're really serious about it, you're going to set up a screen time password that's going to be different than like the code you use to log into your phone. Give that code to somebody else, because I have just held onto it myself before, which is fine. And it's still a nice little like speed bump for you. But you still gotta, if you want 15 more minutes on Twitter, you got to type in the code, and there's like a moment where it's like, okay, I'm making a decision here, which that's valuable. That's valuable. But I would say, like, if you truly feel like you have a problem, or like you want to actually like really put some hard guardrails, give that screen time passcode to someone else, whether it's your spouse, an accountability friend, or friend from church who's maybe in your small group or something like that, who you could certainly contact if there was some reason you like did need to get into your platform for one reason or another. But is not going to just hand you the keys just because. And so I have at times, I think my wife has had it before, I think a different friend has had it before, where like it's a lot harder to get that extra 15 minutes on Twitter if you have to go like asking for it. And so I think that kind of tool has been helpful for me historically. And I've heard great success even from other people. And so that's just an easy way. Of course, I outlined a number of practical ways at the end of terms of service. But having just an accountability partner in general who like follows you on every social media platform and can be like, hey man, I saw you post this on Facebook last week. it's kind of a jerk thing to say. Yeah, I know
Mhm.
you don't agree with that political candidate or whatever, but like it's not really you're not really showing the love of Christ here. You can disagree with that person all day,
Right.
but like it's not, how does that reflect Christ by you posting that?
Right.
It's hard to have those conversations, and you really need to have a great friend who you trust and that they trust you to, that you're not going to be like mad at them or hate them for asking questions like that. But like it's really important, just to me, to recognize that you can't do this stuff alone.
Mhm.
And we need help from other people, whether it's a spouse or a friend from church or whatever else, who just generally holds the same values as we do and can help hold us accountable to reflecting the love of Christ to other people on social media and remembering the image of God in other people. So that's another one that's been helpful for me too, is just having people who are willing to and have permission to call me out. I can't tell you,
Mhm.
especially in that period we were talking about, like 2016 to 2018, the number of people who would like text me a screenshot of something I tweeted and be like, seriously? uh,
Well,
it happened an embarrassing number of times, but it was great. And it's like, I'm so grateful for uncomfortable to be sure. But I'm so grateful that I had people to kind of come alongside me like that, who are kind of like older brothers to me
right.
and like, this is foolish. Like, stop it. And so I think just having people like that, um, like not letting your social media life be off limits from anyone
Right.
is huge.
Which obviously it's not, everything we do is public.
Right.
But having a specific person who's maybe your social media accountability partner, that one of their responsibilities is to hold you accountable, would be a
Yeah.
practical step that you can take to do what you said with number two, which is use social media, don't let it use you. So
Yeah.
setting up guardrails, boundaries that you have to cross over
Yeah.
consistently will hopefully keep you in the right place.
There's a really great question from someone in the Q&A that I can see.
Yeah, I was
They
gonna
asked
bring it
if,
up. I didn't know if you could see it
yeah,
or if only I could, but
yeah, I can see it. I would love to address it. I think it's a wonderful question because it's actually
yeah.
one I've wrestled with a lot myself. It says, if other folks can't see it, do you think the positives outweigh the negatives of social media? I'm asking because I truly wonder if not using social media at all would actually be better. I can't tell you, anonymous attendee, wonderful question, whoever asked this. That's a wonderful question, and I have wrestled with that so many times in my life. And here's how I've landed. And I don't claim, like, if people can disagree with me all day, I've disagreed with myself on this point. So I hold this with a very open hand and as humbly as I can. Um, I believe negatives outweigh the positives on social media. Yes, I think they do. I called social media a cancer to society, and I meant that. And I think that if you were to have a scale of all the negative things about social media and all the positive things about social media in terms of like social and cultural good, shalom, wholeness, and goodness, the negatives would far outweigh the positives because so many of the positives are just like entertainment. And
Hmm.
that's like Postman used to talk about how television is best used for shallow entertainment that is not meaningful. So the television is at its worst when it's used for weighty things. Like he has a whole chapter against like televangelists, and he's not anti-Christian or anything like that. In fact, he was not a Christian, but he was very sympathetic with Christian, like very friendly with Christians. And he was like, I don't like televangelists because not because I don't like Christians, I love Christians, but because the weight of the gospel, the weight of the Christian message is so important that I don't think televangelists realize that they're trivializing it by talking about it on TV. And I kind of get what he means there. As someone who has facilitated Christian content on social media, I think we can unintentionally trivialize really weighty matters by posting about them on Instagram or Twitter or whatever else. But to the specific question, so yes, I think the negatives outweigh the positives. However, I don't think this is a zero sum game where like, oh, because the negatives outweigh the positives, therefore we shouldn't use it at all, or I shouldn't use it at all. I kind of think of it more like candy, if you will. Like, do the negatives outweigh the positives of candy? Well, of course. Like, it rots your teeth and it makes you gain weight and it's going to give you like a sugar high and then a crash. And it's like awful for all of those. Like, if you weighed the positives of candy versus the negatives of candy, the positives, like, yeah, it tastes good. The negatives are like, it's awful in every other conceivable way.
Hmm.
I don't think that means we should never consume candy. Like, I think it's okay to consume candy. Um, but I feel similarly about social media. The positive is there's all kinds of great ways to be entertained, connect with family members, etc. Perhaps even be encouraged by Christian videos or articles or whatever else. But I think, like candy, we engage it too much, it's going to get really unhealthy really quickly in a lot of ways. And so that's where, like, does the positives outweigh the negatives? No. But I don't think that means that, like, oh, well, if the negatives outweigh the positives, then we shouldn't use it at all. I don't think that has to be the case. Now, I think that social media abstinence, if you will, is a totally viable way about going about life. Like, if someone said, man, I just think I shouldn't use social media at all, and it's bad, and more power to you. Like, if you want to be a social media, stay away from it and abstain from it entirely, God bless you, and that's wonderful. I don't feel comfortable saying that, like, everyone should do that, like, it as a rule, because I don't think it has to be that way. But I respect people who do that, and I think it's a viable way to go about things. But I think having a healthy relationship with it, where you have a piece of candy now and then, but you don't eat candy for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, is also a fine way to go about it.
Yeah, so it's moderation, right? It's what you said earlier with the range that you have with intentional engagement being in the middle. We intentionally engage with candy by having a piece every now and then because it tastes good and we enjoy it.
Yeah.
But we don't sit in front of a bowl for 2 hours and just keep consuming
Right.
it because eventually it's going to kill us.
Right.
So yeah, that's a great question. I'm very glad that they asked that question, and I appreciate your answer because there isn't a silver bullet answer, but
Yeah.
it's
I wish
for
it were
each
that
person
easy.
it's for each of us to decide. And
Right.
the main thing is, are we asking the questions?
That's
Because
right.
if you're not asking the questions, if you're not considering your usage, if you're not trying to discern if you're doing things you should be doing with social media, then like we said, it's going to eat us alive.
That's right.
And that's what it's designed to do. So
Yeah.
you can use it intentionally. You can engage with it intentionally in a healthy manner. There's a whole lot of danger there, and there's a whole lot of potential that your relationship with it could become unhealthy if you don't guard your heart, guard your mind, and have some boundaries in place to keep your usage in check. So,
yep.
Awesome. Well, we've got 2 minutes left. Just if I had any other questions I wanted to ask, I was going to ask one other question. Is there any particular, we're thinking about guardrails in place, things to keep in mind, barriers we have to cross to use it to protect us, I guess. Is there any particular scripture verses that you have used in the past to help you to biblically think about your social media usage, whether that's related to, time usage, being a good steward,
That's a good question.
the way you think? I don't know. Is there any particular verses that you've used yourself, you've meditated on or memorized to help guard your social media usage?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I'm what the spiritual discipline I am worst about engaging in, I would say, is scripture memorization, probably. So I'm not I don't have anything ashamedly so to pull out of my pocket in that regard. But where I have run, and it's going to sound trite or stereotypical, I have run regularly to the Proverbs. And I mean, there's so much wisdom in the Proverbs, of course, but like just regarding guarding your mouth, the power of speech, that's where I have run so frequently as I've wrestled with this. And every time when I read the Proverbs, when it comes up in whatever Bible reading plan I'm engaging in a given year, the first like kind of tinge of conviction, or the way I find myself reflecting on some of the Proverbs is by reflecting on my relationship with social media. And so whether it's not being seduced by foolishness in content we engage with or whatever else, or guarding our mouths and recognizing the power of speech. I mean, there's just so much in Proverbs that I think can apply, that yeah, I find myself going there a good bit, or when I'm in the Proverbs, find myself thinking of social media and my relationship with it.
Yeah, that's a great example because that's what the Proverbs are. They teach us how to walk in wisdom. And if you're not walking in wisdom in the way that you're using social media, you're going to go down the wrong path, and the outcome will not be good. And
Yeah.
so one particular verse, Proverbs 4:23, which I think you were kind of referencing, is, guard your heart with all vigilance, for from it flow the springs of life. So the principle there regarding social media is we need to guard our hearts. We need to protect our hearts as we're entering into our usage. We need to know we're diving into water that's filled with sharks. And in one of the things you talked about in your book is we have to understand the water we're swimming in is poisoned, and that's the same idea. So if we enter into it knowing the dangers, and we're walking in wisdom, we're trying to guard ourselves from those dangers that we know are there, then we can use it in a healthy manner. If we're just jumping into the water and swimming and just enjoying our lives and having a great time and hoping for the best, the outcome will likely not be good. So Proverbs is a great suggestion. So I think we'll wrap up with that. We're at 7:02 now. I want to get everybody out of here on time. So once again, Chris, thank you very much for your time. Thank you for the things that you've shared with us tonight, as well as 2 weeks ago. I've enjoyed our time together, and who knows, maybe we can do something similar again in the future. So I will just close us in prayer, and I'll let everyone here know. Once we have the recording done, I'll be sending that out to everyone, and we'll also be posting it on our website. So if you know of people that might benefit from this material, you'd be happy or welcome to share it with them, send it to them. Maybe even post it on social media. Maybe it'd be something that we could use social media for good. And there are ways to do that as well. So let me pray for us, and we'll be done for tonight. So Father, we just come to you, and we thank you for Chris. We thank you for his wisdom. Thank you for his life experiences that he's had, and for the study that he's done on this topic that affects us all. Help us, Lord, to glorify you, to honor you, to guard our hearts as we are using social media, so that we can have a healthy, intentional relationship with us. Give us wisdom, give us understanding. For some of us, it might be that you want us to completely erase all of our accounts and not expose ourselves to it at all. For some, that might be the best case. For others, maybe you just want us to use social media with more moderation, and to not spend as much time, and to limit ourselves more. So just guide us, direct our hearts, help us to follow your guidance, whatever that might be, and help us in the future, Lord, to use social media in a way that is not only healthy for ourselves, but most importantly, brings honor and glory to your name, and values the image that the people around us bear, your image that the people around us bear. So we thank you for this time, and we pray all this in Christ's name. Amen.
Amen.
All right. Thanks, Chris. Thanks, everyone. Have a good evening.
Enjoy the Purdue game if you're watching.
Yeah. Boiler up.
Boiler up.
All right. Thanks.